Hey guys, tonight we're pulling back the silk curtains on a world that's somehow even less comfortable than your in-laws' guest bed. The daily existence of medieval royalty. Forget the gold crowns and HBO drama. Tonight, you get to find out what it was really like to be king or queen in the Middle Ages. Spoiler alert, it's not all feasting on turkey legs and banishing people who make eye contact. No. Being royalty back then was more like managing a leaky castle, a suspiciously medieval HR department, and a constant fear of death by soup. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that white noise, and get as comfortable as possible. But let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what a medieval king actually did all day, besides looking stern in portraits? Did queens really spend hours weaving, or were they just hiding from the drafty windows? How many taster testers did you need before you trusted your own breakfast? Did anyone ever actually enjoy wearing a crown, or was it mostly about fighting off head lice and migraines? What would it be like to wake up in a freezing stone chamber, only to realize that your main job is surviving the next political plot, plague, or poorly cooked swan? Could you handle the pressure of choosing which cousin to marry for political gain, and which one to accidentally send to a monastery? And most importantly, if you had to use the medieval toilet, would you do it with dignity or just move to France? Congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1387, and you are not just royalty. You are the hot new monarch on the medieval scene. The crown is too heavy, your feet are freezing, and your bed smells faintly of goat. Good luck. The sun barely peeks through your arrow-slit window, and already a servant is shuffling toward your bed, gently poking you with a stick like you're a large, suspicious cake. You are a king or queen, but that doesn't mean you get to sleep in, heaven forbid. You're up with the cockerels, because nothing says divine right to rule like being rudely awakened by a man with breath that could knock over a cow. Medieval royalty had no concept of the snooze button, unless you count groaning loudly and hoping Geoffrey gives up. Sadly, Geoffrey never gives up. His job, handed down from a long line of professional waker-uppers, is to make sure you're upright before the second church bell. You can't be late. There's a schedule full of things you didn't ask for: prayers, council meetings, and a breakfast that may or may not try to poison you. And all of it starts with the medieval version of an alarm clock, a slightly confused man poking you with increasing urgency. The room isn't exactly a haven of comfort either. Your bed, the supposed symbol of power, is a sprawling wooden frame stacked with straw mattresses, moth-nibbled sheets, and exactly 7 pillows, 5 of which are purely decorative, and 1 of which is suspiciously damp. The chamber itself smells faintly of wood smoke, old wine, and the kind of sweat that only happens when you sleep under 4 wool blankets and a tapestry depicting your great-great-grandfather battling a dragon. The draft from the window is so sharp it could double as a weapon. The only thing worse than being cold in bed is knowing you'll be even colder out of it. As you blearily try to focus on the blurry face hovering at the edge of your vision, Geoffrey clears his throat and delivers the standard royal morning greeting, which is less, "Good morning, Your Majesty," and more, "Please don't throw your shoe at me again." You contemplate it. You really do. But hurling footwear at servants is so last dynasty. Instead, you roll over, groan, and listen to the daily list of urgent events awaiting your royal presence. It's always the same: morning prayers, council, maybe a visit from a neighboring noble who smells like pickled onions, and, oh joy, a petition from the town's leading goat enthusiast. By the time your feet touch the cold flagstones, Geoffrey has already opened the shutters, unleashing a blast of fresh air and possibly a pigeon into your room. Sunlight slants across the dust motes, swirling above your bed, illuminating yesterday's discarded robe and a crown that never seems to sit straight. Servants shuffle in like a parade of sleep-deprived ghosts, one holding your slippers, made of something that used to be a sheep, another pouring lukewarm water into a chipped basin so you can splash your face in something that is technically fresh. The ritual is always the same. You try not to shiver. The servants try not to look directly at your bedhead. And everyone pretends you're wide awake and bursting with royal wisdom. It's all very ceremonial. But underneath, there's an unspoken, slightly desperate energy. Nobody wants to be the servant who lets the king or queen oversleep. Not after the incident of the missing sunrise, which we don't talk about anymore. There's also the very real danger that some overeager under-butler will try to impress you by composing a little morning poem. Geoffrey once tried that. He no longer tries. And through it all, you wonder, is this what absolute power feels like? Being shaken awake before dawn by a man named Geoffrey, surrounded by nervous attendants, your royal posterior freezing to a chair that probably remembers the Black Death. You sigh, pull on your robe, and prepare to face a day filled with obligations you never asked for. In a palace that's colder than most cellars, with a staff that treats you like both a living god and a slightly grouchy toddler. But that's royalty for you, no matter how grand your title. Your day still starts with a poke, a chill, and the lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow Geoffrey will get lost on the way to your chamber. And yet you rise. Because in the medieval world, the first royal act of every day isn't issuing a decree or passing judgment. It's just surviving the morning wake-up call, dignity optional. Welcome to the royal bedchamber, which sounds glamorous until you realize it's mostly stone, drafts, and the gentle midnight serenade of rats looking for breadcrumbs. Your bed is a massive wooden construction piled high with lumpy mattresses and even lumpier expectations. Luxury, medieval style means layers of dusty blankets and never quite knowing what that smell is. Forget the Instagram images of billowing curtains and soft candlelight. This is not Versailles. It's basically a glorified cave with furniture and a tapestry of your least favorite ancestor staring at you from across the room. The air is thick with cold and a hint of mildew, which in a royal context counts as character. Every stone wall is helpfully designed to suck the warmth from your body the moment you stop moving. The castle architect must have taken inspiration from a refrigerator. You'd think being a king or queen would get you some kind of upgrade, heated floors, featherbeds, or at least a draft stopper that isn't a rolled-up ferret pelt. But no. Your luxury sleeping arrangement involves a creaky bed frame that's seen more royal disasters than the family tree, a straw mattress that settles into suspicious dips, and sheets that might once have been white but now wear the patina of 2 generations' worth of anxiety sweat. You pull the covers tight, but they itch, scratch, and, if you're lucky, only occasionally bite back. As you settle in for the night, the sounds begin. First, the gentle skittering of a mouse investigating your bedside table, possibly weighing up the risks of stealing a crumb of hard bread. Then, the bolder scurrying of its larger cousin, the castle rat, who has absolutely no respect for rank or privacy. You listen to them negotiating over a crust, their tiny claws clicking against the flagstones. Somewhere in the darkness, a moth flutters against the wall, seeking the single candle that bravely battles the damp. It's not exactly restful, but it is medieval. Then there's the cold. Castles are notorious for being chilly, but the royal bedchamber is especially gifted in this department. The fire in the corner hearth provides just enough warmth to make you think it might help, and just enough smoke to remind you that chimneys are still an experimental technology. You drift off in a haze of cold feet and mild carbon monoxide poisoning, wrapped in woolen blankets heavy enough to pin you to the bed. If you wake up in the night and wonder why your toes have stopped working, congratulations. You're experiencing royal life in its purest form. Of course, a royal never sleeps alone. Servants slip in and out, stoking the fire, adding more logs, and sometimes accidentally letting in more cold. Your personal attendant might try to fluff your pillow, which mostly results in rearranging the lumps and releasing a fresh puff of dust. Someone else quietly checks for unwanted guests, which is code for looking under the bed to make sure none of the rats have decided to nap on your royal slippers. Privacy isn't a thing here. The medieval concept of personal space is just the area where your servants aren't currently standing. And then there's the decor. Tapestries hang on the walls, designed to trap what little warmth there is, but mostly working as elaborate dust collectors. Each one tells a story, but none of the stories are interesting at 3 a.m. when you're staring into the eyes of a poorly stitched unicorn. The furniture is heavy, ornately carved, and positioned just so you can stub your toe in the dark with maximum agony. If you need to use the chamber pot, it's either freezing cold, already occupied by a spider, or placed just far enough away to be an obstacle course for your bare feet. You'd think royalty could get used to it. They do, in a way, just as you'd get used to sleeping on a pile of winter coats in your neighbor's unfinished basement. Eventually, you become grateful for the little things. A night without new bites. A morning when you wake up warmer than the room. Or a rat that leaves you an acorn as tribute. So the next time you fluff your pillow, pull up your comforter, and adjust your thermostat, remember, your bedchamber might not be royal, but at least your night's sleep won't be scored to the sound of rodents and regret. That's real luxury. Dressing like a monarch isn't about self-expression. It's about survival, showing off wealth, and sometimes accidentally strangling yourself with your own collar. A team of servants yanks, buttons, and laces you into layers of itchy wool, damp linen, and that one cloak that weighs more than your family's collective anxiety. You'd think picking out an outfit as royalty would be all fun. Just a simple question of what color says I'm in charge today. But the truth is, royal fashion in the Middle Ages is less about personal style and more about broadcasting to everyone in the castle that you are, in fact, important enough to be very, very uncomfortable. Every layer is a statement. Look at my wealth. Marvel at my embroidery. Ignore the fact that I can't move my neck. Your day begins with a parade of attendants, each with their own specialized job. One to brush out your hair, one to wrestle your undertunic into submission, and a third just to stand by with emergency pins for when your sleeves inevitably try to detach from the rest of your body. You're not so much getting dressed as you are being assembled, like a very expensive, historically inaccurate action figure. The process starts with linen. Always linen. Soft, you'd hope. But after years of use and medieval laundry techniques, mostly involving pounding on a rock and a half-hearted prayer, it's about as cozy as a potato sack that's been left out in the rain. On goes your undertunic, which by itself could pass for a perfectly acceptable modern nightgown if you weren't about to bury it under 10 more layers. The undertunic gets followed by your main tunic, thick wool in summer and even thicker wool in winter, as if the goal is to trap enough body heat to survive a polar expedition without leaving your bedroom. Then comes the real fun. The fastenings. Buttons are rare and precious, so most of your clothes are tied together with a complicated system of laces and toggles. Getting your sleeves on straight is a group effort. Sometimes you wonder if your tailor was paid by the knot. If you're a king, there's probably a jeweled belt involved. Heavy, beautiful, and absolutely certain to dig into your ribs the moment you sit down. Queens get elaborate girdles, often more decorative than functional, unless your definition of functional includes accidental corseting and mild panic attacks. Outer garments are the pièce de résistance, a cloak or mantle lined with fur if you're lucky, and if not, lined with something that is definitely still shedding. The heaviest cloak, the one you're supposed to wear for official occasions, is so massive it requires its own attendant just to arrange it behind you like the world's most passive-aggressive scarf. The weight is reassuring in the way that being pressed by a slow-moving glacier is reassuring. And don't forget the accessories. Shoes are stiff, flat, and about as ergonomic as a piece of stale bread. Hats, hoods, and veils must be perfectly positioned. Crowns and circlets sit just wrong enough to give you a headache before breakfast. There's always jewelry, just enough to demonstrate wealth, but not so much that you get accused of trying too hard. Every jewel comes with a backstory, most of which involve inheritance, drama, family curses, or at least one person who fell out of a tower. Throughout the ordeal, your servants are professionally stoic, even as you catch them exchanging sympathetic glances behind your back. They know you'll need help later when you inevitably get tangled, overheat, or discover a mysterious medieval wardrobe malfunction. It happens at least once a week, often during important ceremonies. Finally, you emerge. A vision of power, prestige, and just a hint of personal suffering. You are swaddled, laced, belted, and trussed, ready to greet your kingdom, sign some decrees, and spend the rest of the morning trying to discreetly scratch wherever the wool is doing its worst work. So, next time you slip into your stretchy pants and soft t-shirt, maybe take a moment to appreciate that your fashion statement isn't likely to cut off your circulation or require a 5-person extraction team by lunchtime. Medieval royalty suffered for fashion. And now, thanks to them, you don't have to. Forget eggs Benedict. Breakfast is a buffet of yesterday's mutton, rock-hard bread, and a goblet of spiced wine strong enough to disinfect a jousting wound. Food tasters sample each dish first, and you watch them nervously for any sudden faceplants. Bon appétit. You might imagine a royal breakfast as a spread of gleaming silver platters, steaming pastries, and gentle sunlight streaming through clean glass windows. Reality check. The sunlight is struggling through dirty, arrow-slit windows, and your pastries are more likely to be tough slabs of yesterday's rye bread, sharp enough to threaten dental work you don't even have. In place of coffee, you get a tankard of wine or weak ale, and it's not just for show, it's because water is so unsafe that it could double as a weapon in a court intrigue. Your breakfast ritual begins before you even take a seat. First, the food tasters. These are the bravest, most underappreciated souls in the kingdom. Each morning, they approach your table like it's the final round of a very passive-aggressive game show. Their job? Eat a bite of everything, then stand there for a few tense moments to see if they remain upright. If your taster looks even slightly queasy, breakfast gets sent back to the kitchen, and so do your trust issues. It's the only meal in the world where someone else's stomachache is your insurance policy. Once it's confirmed that nothing on the table is actively lethal, you're served a hearty portion of leftovers. Yesterday's roast, now nicely congealed, sits beside a pile of dried-out cheese and bread that's about as soft as a cobblestone. Fresh fruit is rare and likely wrinkled, because preservation techniques involve little more than hoping for a cold snap and crossing your fingers. A pot of porridge appears, looking innocent but hiding all manner of surprises. Sometimes a turnip, sometimes a small pebble, occasionally a worm that's just as surprised as you are. And don't even get started on the eggs. If there are eggs, they've probably been cooked hard, peeled with someone's fingernails, and served up cold, slightly sulphurous, and always a little suspicious. The luxury items are just as much of an adventure. Honey is precious and reserved for special days. Butter is a rare treat, and spices are guarded like crown jewels. If there's pepper on your table, you can be sure your steward will mention it at least 3 times before you're halfway through your bowl of questionable mush. If you're lucky, there's a slab of bacon. If you're very unlucky, the bacon has been out since last week and now doubles as a medieval performance test for your immune system. Let's talk about the drinks. Wine and ale are standard, usually weak enough not to get you drunk yet, but strong enough to keep you hydrated without the added side effect of dysentery. Sometimes breakfast includes a medicinal tonic from your royal physician, who swears it will improve your humors, but actually tastes like spoiled herbs and regret. You take a sip, grimace, and wonder if this is how they keep the monarchy going, through sheer, bitter perseverance. All the while, the dining room is a parade of early morning activity. Courtiers hover, servants rush in and out, and someone's always dropping something. The steward reads off a list of pressing matters, who's waiting for an audience, which cousin wants a favor, which noble is unhappy about breakfast, as if you're not already busy enough just trying to get a dry crust down. You nod, pretend to care, and chew thoughtfully on something that may once have been an onion. Yet, for all the discomfort, breakfast is also a brief moment of power. You're the center of attention. People watch how you eat, what you praise, and, most importantly, what you send back untouched. If you're clever, you can communicate your opinions to the court just by where you set your spoon. Is the venison too dry? Is the bread too stale? Your chef's reputation hangs in the balance with every bite. And when the meal is done, you rise, hopefully still alive and parasite-free, ready to face another day of royal headaches. Breakfast wasn't always delicious, but it was always consequential. In the end, that might be the most medieval thing about it. So, bon appetit, Your Majesty. And remember, if the food doesn't get you, the meetings might. Time to hold court. The throne room is less Game of Thrones and more group therapy with everyone you hate. Your job? Sit on a chair with the ergonomic design of a stone slab. Listen to complaints about taxes. And look wise. Bonus points if you manage not to fall asleep mid-petition. Let's set the scene. The throne room is the cold, echoing heart of your castle. It's designed to impress, and possibly to terrify, anyone who walks in, with high vaulted ceilings, walls lined with faded tapestries depicting famous ancestors you vaguely resemble, and windows so high up you need to squint just to see the weather. Sunlight pours through in dramatic beams, illuminating the dust motes, the dour faces of your counselors, and you, perched on a piece of furniture that's basically a medieval torture device disguised as a seat of power. Your throne is, in theory, the symbol of authority. In practice, it's a chair designed by someone who thought comfort was a sign of weakness. The back is straight, the armrests are cold, and the seat is so wide you're never sure if you're sitting in the right place. The only padding is the layers of royal robes you're wearing, which offer all the ergonomic support of an overstuffed woolen rug. If you're a king, there might be a slightly threadbare lion's head carved into the armrest for intimidation. If you're a queen, perhaps a unicorn. Either way, your legs fall asleep before you do. Court begins, and the room quickly fills with an odd mix of nobles, officials, petitioners, and people who have been waiting since dawn just for the chance to tell you about their neighbor's scandalous pig. Everyone bows, kneels, or curtsies in an order no one quite remembers. Your steward announces each visitor with unnecessary ceremony, just to make sure everyone knows that nothing will happen quickly today. Then come the grievances. Being a monarch means you are the living suggestion box of the kingdom, except you're not allowed to ignore the complaints or delete the emails. One after another, petitioners shuffle forward, each with a request, a complaint, or a plea for justice. There are endless arguments over grazing rights, boundary stones, missing chickens, and, inevitably, taxes. The tax complaints are always the loudest. Sometimes you wonder if your only real job is apologizing for the existence of money. You try your best to look interested, maybe nodding thoughtfully while internally ranking the various whiners for future exile. If you're lucky, your chancellor will jump in to clarify local law. If you're unlucky, they'll argue with the bishop, who is arguing with your mother-in-law, who is arguing with the local baker, who just wants his oven back. You start to daydream about a vacation. Somewhere warm. Somewhere with fewer lawsuits about turnips. Of course, every word you say in the throne room is analyzed for hidden meaning. If you smile, it means mercy. If you frown, it's a threat. If you sigh, 3 people might get banished. And the scribe will write a poem about your troubled soul. You're not just a ruler, you're a medieval oracle, forced to dispense wisdom on topics as varied as land inheritance, bread quality, and why the moat smells worse this year. And through it all, you must never show boredom, hunger, or, God forbid, a need to visit the royal garderobe. You sit for hours, your only entertainment, the occasional dramatic outburst or the jester making faces from behind a tapestry. The most challenging part isn't the politics, it's staying awake while an elderly knight explains, in excruciating detail, how his prized goose was insulted by a rival family. By mid-morning, your back is screaming, your patience is wearing thin, and your feet are going numb. The throne room is still packed, and you realize you're barely halfway through the list. You consider faking your own death just for the thrill of seeing the Chancellor's face. But you endure. Because the crown might be heavy, but the chair is worse. And when you finally stand, the people will cheer, not out of love, but because everyone's left with at least the hope that next week's session will have more entertainment and less discussion of pig disputes. If you survived the throne room without snoring, congratulations. You've already done more than most monarchs before lunch. Good news, you have access to baths. Bad news, the bath is an ordeal, heated water is a luxury, and even your best perfumes smell faintly like goat. Everyone's afraid of catching the chill, so you mostly just layer on more powder and hope for the best. Let's start with the basics, your royalty, which means you don't have to wash in the river with the peasants. Instead, you get your own wooden tub, roughly the size and shape of an oversized soup pot, hauled into your chilly bedchamber by a team of servants. If you're lucky, they've managed to lug enough buckets of water up from the kitchen fires before the water turns cold, which is about 30 seconds. The bath itself is both a luxury and a team sport. At least 3 people have to negotiate the logistics of boiling, hauling, and pouring the water, while you stand nearby, trying to look dignified in a linen shift and not shiver yourself into a new religion. By the time the tub is ready, half the castle knows it's your bath day. Everyone from the scullery maid to the master-at-arms has a strong opinion about how much rosewater should be poured in hint, not enough to mask the essence of the castle. If you're the king, you might get extra petals or a handful of dried herbs. If you're the queen, maybe even a splash of imported oils, if the supply hasn't run out or gone rancid. The real challenge? Not dying of embarrassment or hypothermia before you're even clean. Bathing is considered mildly risky business. The medical wisdom of the era says that bathing opens the pores and lets all the worst diseases in. So most people think you're courting death just by taking your tunic off. The result? You bathe only occasionally, for special events, coronations, or after a particularly sweaty joust. In between, you trust to the magic of perfume, scented sachets, and enough powder to make you look like a very anxious loaf of bread. Perfume, in theory, should help. In practice, it's like playing medieval chemistry roulette. The best fragrances are imported: ambergris, civet, rosewater, stored in tiny glass bottles and guarded like crown jewels. You dab some on your wrists, neck, and the inside of your shirt, then hope it covers the underlying notes of sheep, old wine, and distant panic. The cheaper stuff, made by the local apothecary, tends to amplify the barnyard chic and sometimes makes your nose itch for hours. Still, you keep applying, because if you can't actually be clean, you can at least smell interesting. And then there are the fleas. Royalty is not immune to the world's most democratic parasite. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs are a fact of life, no matter how many rings you wear. There's an entire class of nitpickers, actual professionals employed to comb through royal hair, searching for tiny invaders. Your laundry is constantly being boiled, beaten, and hung in the sun, but somehow the bugs always find you. In the evenings, you might sit in front of the fire with your closest attendants, everyone quietly scratching and pretending it's just the wool tunic. If you're feeling fancy, you can powder your scalp with fragrant herbs, which mostly just confuses the lice. When all else fails, you fall back on the oldest tricks: more layers, more powder, and a general policy of not getting too close to anyone else. Court etiquette conveniently requires distance. Bows and curtsies are performed at arm's length, not just out of respect, but because nobody wants to get a noseful of eau de medieval. If you do happen to catch a chill, or worse, a rash, your royal physician will prescribe a hot toddy, a mustard plaster, or an optimistic leech or two. If that doesn't work, you can always blame your enemies for cursing your bathwater. In the end, royal hygiene is less about staying clean and more about surviving the experience with your dignity and hairline intact. You emerge from your infrequent ablutions feeling slightly less itchy, slightly more powdered, and ready to face another day of medieval life. Just don't get too close to the tapestries, or you might find yourself right back where you started, with an itch you can't scratch in public. So tonight, as you reach for your lavender-scented lotion and enjoy the miracle of a hot shower, remember, there was a time when even the king or queen would have traded half the kingdom for a single bar of modern soap. Whether you're a king with a crown or a queen with a hennin, that weird pointy hat, your hair is under constant siege. Lice combs are a daily necessity, and there's always the risk that your headdress will poke someone's eye out at dinner. Let's start with the basics. Medieval royalty didn't have access to salons, hair dryers, or a soothing scalp massage unless you count the nitpicker, who is basically a medieval spa technician with a sharp stick and zero sense of humor. Your hair is expected to be a symbol of status, health, and, occasionally, military strategy. For kings, a flowing mane is a sign of virility and authority, provided you can keep the lice from staging a coup. For queens, hair should be long, glossy, and artfully hidden under enough cloth and wire to double as a small siege engine. Each morning, you're treated to a styling session that's part beauty routine, part full-contact sport. Servants appear, armed with combs, pins, and bottles of rosewater, their faces set in grim determination. If you're the king, your beard is trimmed and oiled, sometimes decorated with a jewel or two if it's a feast day or you're feeling especially ostentatious. If you're the queen, your hair gets braided, wrapped, and folded with all the delicacy of an origami swan. The goal is to keep it off your face, out of your food, and above all, free of visible pests. But this is easier said than done. Hygiene is, as we've established, not exactly medieval Europe's strong suit. Even with daily combings and generous applications of scented powders, everyone lives in terror of the louse crisis, that moment when a tiny invader decides to explore new territory right in the middle of mass. Lice combs are prized possessions, passed down through generations, and often worn smooth from use. Finding a particularly persistent nit can turn the royal morning into a scene straight out of a horror story. Then there's the question of headgear. Kings have crowns, heavy, bejeweled, and never quite the right fit. They pinch your temples and leave a permanent dent if you wear them too long. Like a medieval version of headphone hair, but with more sapphires. If you're unlucky, your crown is inherited, which means it was sized for an ancestor with a completely different head shape. And now you have to wear it anyway, nodding graciously while your scalp slowly loses feeling. Queens are blessed with the hennin, a conical hat that makes you look like an exclamation mark in every tapestry. These hats require complicated construction, involving wire frames, fine linen, and sometimes even imported silk veils that flutter dramatically in the breeze, or in the soup depending on where you're sitting. Wearing a hennin is not for the faint-hearted. You need balance, posture, and a highly developed sense of spatial awareness. The taller the hennin, the higher your status, supposedly. In practice, it just means you have to duck through every doorway and apologize in advance to anyone sitting to your left at banquets. There are rumors that the tallest hennins doubled as emergency signal towers in times of crisis. But the historical record is, sadly, silent on this point. Of course, all headgear comes with risk. At best, you might lose an earring or two. At worst, you could accidentally joust your favorite cousin during a particularly animated toast. The courts are littered with stories of hats catching fire from stray candles or getting tangled in ceiling beams during processions. And nothing ruins the dignified air of royalty faster than having your hat topple off mid-speech, revealing a flattened hairstyle and a look of existential regret. In the end, keeping up royal appearances means accepting that your scalp is a constant battleground. Between the lice, the hats, and the endless pins, you wage a daily war for dignity. One comb, one veil, one accidental poke at a time. So, tonight, as you rest your head on a clean pillow and maybe grumble about bedhead, remember, your medieval royal ancestors would have traded half their kingdoms for a bottle of shampoo and a hat that didn't require an architectural blueprint. The main rule of royal marriage: don't get too attached. Your spouse is likely chosen for political advantage, and yes, there's a decent chance you're related. The upside? Family reunions are always awkward, but you're never short of heirs or lawsuits. Forget star-crossed lovers and romantic walks through the castle gardens. Royal marriage is less about moonlight and more about balance sheets. The primary ingredient in any wedding contract is power, land, titles, armies, and if you're really lucky, a halfway decent vineyard thrown in. Your marriage is a chess move, and you're not always sure if you're the knight, the pawn, or just the fancy piece that gets knocked over when someone gets bored. Let's talk about the courtship phase. Spoiler, there isn't one. Maybe you exchange a few letters written by scribes with handwriting worse than a medieval barber, surgeon. If you're a king, your advisors send out feelers to every eligible princess with a pulse and a strategic coastline. If you're a queen, your fate is even less in your hands. Your parents have already decided that Lord Reginald of Swamplands has the best cattle to acreage ratio, and it's only a matter of time before you're off to meet your new in-laws, who are also probably your great-uncle's cousin's stepchildren. The actual wedding is a spectacle. Hundreds of guests, mountains of food, and at least one drunken uncle who brings up that time your two bloodlines feuded over a goat. The priest drones through the vows while everyone in the audience calculates exactly how much power your union shifts from one house to another. The honeymoon? You might not even speak the same language as your spouse, but everyone expects you to produce an heir by next spring or risk a national crisis. Once you're married, the real negotiations begin. Love isn't required, civility is a bonus. Your job as king or queen is to look like you're happy in public, and in private, try to avoid any conversation that starts with, "So, how are we related again?" There's an entire genre of awkward court poetry devoted to pretending that being married to your third cousin is the ultimate expression of dynastic love. But even the minstrels don't sound convinced. If you're lucky, your spouse is more interested in falconry than fighting, and you can enjoy parallel lives. He in the tilt yard, you in the garden, and everyone agreeing that a little distance is good for the kingdom. If you're less lucky, every disagreement becomes a diplomatic incident. A misplaced fork at dinner can be interpreted as a slight against your spouse's homeland, and forgetting a birthday could be grounds for war. Royal marriages have ended entire alliances over arguments about whose turn it was to control the family's salt mines. Of course, the whole point is to have children, lots of them, preferably healthy, preferably male, and preferably not obviously related to the court jester. Each new baby is a tiny political treaty, a living contract, and a reason for another round of expensive banquets. The stakes are high. No heirs means your enemies start measuring your coffin and drafting new succession charts. Too many heirs, and you have to start worrying about sibling rivalry with actual armies. And then there's the extended family. Your in-laws are everywhere. They're kings, dukes, bishops, and that one cousin who insists he should be named regent if you sneeze too hard. Every family dinner is a minefield of political gossip and not-so-subtle threats about inheritance. If you're smart, you keep your answers vague and your goblet full. In the end, royal marriage is about endurance and strategy, not romance. You play the long game, smiling through banquets, surviving family drama, and quietly hoping your great-great-grandchildren will finally marry outside the gene pool. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that royal love is less about hearts and more about very complicated family trees, some with suspiciously few branches. So the next time you swipe right or nervously meet the parents, just remember, at least you didn't have to marry your cousin to keep the peace in Europe. Progress. Mealtime for royalty means a long parade of meats, pies, and dubious jellies. There are trumpets for every course, and a fool who tries to juggle eels. Table manners are mostly about not getting gravy on your crown. Imagine walking into the great hall. Torches flicker against the walls, banners hang overhead, and 100 eyes are already watching your every move. The scent of roast meat, plus about 6 competing perfumes, mingles in the air, occasionally overwhelmed by the suspicious tang of boiled cabbage. The royal table groans under the weight of trenchers, that's bread plates for the uninitiated. Towers of pastries, glazed songbirds, and a whole pig decorated with fruit, as if the only thing stopping you from eating more pork is a lack of citrus garnish. The whole affair is less quick bite before work and more sustained endurance challenge with a captive audience. Every meal begins with ritual. Servants process in, bearing the first course with enough ceremony to consecrate a new cathedral. Heralds announce what you're about to eat, often using the kind of language that makes swan in aspic sound, both exciting and slightly threatening. You have to nod appreciatively, even when you're 70% sure that aspic is just what happens when the kitchen loses a bet. And then the eating begins. 10 courses isn't an exaggeration, it's a threat. There's no concept of portion control. Each plate is heaped high, and if you're the guest of honor, you're expected to sample everything. Want to pass on the boiled eel pie? Too bad. The chef is watching, the court is watching, and the eel's mother is probably cursing your lineage. Meanwhile, your food taster is lurking nearby, dramatically sampling each bite before you commit. Nothing ruins a roast like a sudden collapse at the high table. Table manners are complicated, but only in the sense that no one really follows them. Forks are rare, and mostly for stabbing things dramatically. Most food is handled with a knife, a spoon, or, if you're feeling confident, your bare hands. Bread is your universal utensil. Scoop, sop, and shovel everything onto your trencher until the trencher itself is so soaked with juice and grease that it gets handed off to the dogs. Or, if you're feeling generous, the nearest monk. Entertainment is non-stop. Minstrels sing, acrobats tumble, and the jester will almost certainly try to make a hat out of something edible. If you're lucky, someone will play a lute, softly, in the background. If you're unlucky, there's a bagpipe solo, and the acoustics of the hall make sure no one escapes. Meanwhile, your guests talk politics, religion, and who has the better falcon. Every toast is an opportunity to make a veiled threat, a bold promise, or simply spill wine on someone important. By the third or fourth course, everything begins to blur together. Pies stuffed with more pies, roasted fowl in elaborate sauces, and jellies that quiver with both mystery and, probably, regret. There are dishes named after previous monarchs who died under suspicious circumstances, and desserts that are less sweet treat and more dare you to survive this much sugar and lard. Spices are a flex. If there's enough cinnamon and pepper, everyone knows you're rich, even if you have no idea what you're eating. The meal stretches on. You try not to fall asleep between courses or accidentally start a scandal by picking the wrong joint of meat. Eventually, someone proposes a final toast, a choir sings, and the whole thing ends with a last parade of candied nuts and fruit. Your jaw aches, your belt is one notch looser, and your dignity is holding on by a gravy-stained thread. In the end, royal feasts are about more than food. They're displays of wealth, power and stamina, the kind of event where surviving until the end is as much a victory as any battle. If you make it through dinner without a grease stain, a political disaster, or a surprise proposal, you're truly living the royal dream. So next time you microwave leftovers in your pajamas, just remember, at least no one expects you to juggle eels before dessert. Every conversation with your nobles is a chess match, except everyone's cheating and someone might actually be hiding a knife. Flattery, subtle threats, and endless small talk about hunting accidents fill your day. Nobles are the co-workers you can't fire, the neighbors you can't avoid, and the relatives you're forced to invite to every single holiday meal. They surround you in the court, dressed to impress and trained from birth in the art of smiling through gritted teeth. Their compliments always come with a hidden message. If a duke tells you your cloak is exceptionally bold, check your back for a note, a bribe, or possibly a wanted poster. It's not so much a court as a high-stakes drama club with slightly more velvet and a lot more risk of sudden death. The real danger isn't what's said to your face, it's what happens after you leave the room. A well-timed rumor can topple a dynasty faster than an invading army. And the only thing more dangerous than a noble with a grudge is a noble with free time. Every meeting is layered with coded language, half smiles, and strategic silences. If you're lucky, you'll get through a morning of council meetings with nothing more dangerous than a snide comment about your new haircut. If you're unlucky, someone will politely suggest that your bloodline's claim to the throne is just fascinating, historically speaking. Feasts are especially treacherous. Nobles deliver toasts that are masterclasses in passive aggression. To our wise monarch, who bravely endures all criticism, even from those closest to the throne, you're expected to smile, raise your goblet, and pretend not to notice the sideways glances between your cousins. After dessert, a handful of barons may offer gifts, elaborate, useless, and sometimes just bait. Accept the wrong one, and suddenly you're on the hook for a favor you didn't know you owed. Of course, there's the ever-present fear of poison. That's why you never eat or drink anything that hasn't been sampled by a taster, sniffed by the steward, and, ideally, gossiped about by the entire kitchen staff. In particularly tense times, the royal dog gets more treats than you do, just in case someone tries to slip a little medieval flavor into your venison. You develop a sixth sense for suspicious pies and accidentally swap goblets with your least favorite courtier at every opportunity. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the intrigue multiplies. Nobles ally, conspire, and scheme, all while insisting on their absolute loyalty. They marry off their children strategically, sometimes to your own family, sometimes to your enemies, and present every new birth as an opportunity to renegotiate land, titles, and who gets the biggest chair at council. A simple walk in the gardens can become a 3-act play about territorial boundaries, inheritance rights, and who was seen sneaking out of the kitchens after midnight. The stakes are always high. Offend the wrong earl, and you could find yourself facing a rebellion, or at least a season of passive-aggressive snubbing at every major feast. Praise the wrong lady in waiting, and suddenly there's a scandal involving a goat, a tapestry, and 3 new ballads written by court poets who should really mind their own business. Every decision you make sends ripples through the noble class, ripples that, given enough time, can become tsunamis. Surviving the nobility requires stamina, wit, and the memory of an elephant. You must recall every wedding gift, every slight, every uncle's grudge, and each countess's most embarrassing secret. Sometimes, the only way to get through the day is to pretend you don't notice the knives behind the smiles, the threats behind the flattery, or the fact that the reason the Viscount keeps inviting you to hunt is because the last 3 kings met accidents in the woods. At the end of the day, if you've kept your head, figuratively and literally, you've done well. Dealing with nobles is about survival, subtlety, and knowing exactly how much poison you can handle in your wine without anyone noticing. So next time your office politics get you down, remember, at least your co-workers aren't legally allowed to challenge you to a duel over who sat closest to the boss at lunch. Medieval management. Not recommended, but never boring. There's no email, but plenty of paperwork. Scribes shove documents under your nose to sign, and you agree to laws about sheep, roads, and whether your cousin is allowed to collect tolls from passing ducks. Being royalty is supposed to be about glory, power, and looking intimidating in portraits. In reality, it's mostly about reading through stacks of parchment that smell faintly of old cheese and spilled wine. Each day, your council bombards you with scrolls, edicts, petitions, and at least one urgent letter from a distant baron who has discovered a new way to be offended by offense. There's no mark, all as read option. Instead, you brace yourself for hours of ink-stained fingers and the constant threat of carpal tunnel medieval edition. Let's start with the laws. Medieval lawmaking isn't about grand principles or bold reforms. It's about fixing whatever went wrong at last week's market day. Your advisors assemble, each armed with a list of pressing concerns. Your Majesty, the pigs are loose again in the North Quarter. Shall we decree that all swine be fitted with tiny bells? Sire, there's confusion about whether the bishop's chickens are subject to the salt tax. Before you know it, you're agreeing to regulations about cheese weights, horseshoes, and the precise punishment for stealing apples from the castle orchard. Every law you sign seems oddly specific, but that's because each one solves a problem you didn't know existed, usually created by the noble who suggested it. Then there are the taxes. Taxes. If there's one universal constant, it's that everyone hates them. Nobles claim they're already taxed to the bone. Peasants insist they can't spare another turnip, and your cousins send word that they've just invented temporary tolls that mysteriously never disappear. Scribes draft complicated ledgers showing exactly how much wheat, silver, or livestock each region owes the crown. You stare at the columns, nod thoughtfully, and then hope someone else actually knows how to do math. Sometimes you sign a decree just to see if anyone is paying attention. Henceforth, every cart must pay a penny to cross the East Bridge, unless the cart contains only geese. Congratulations, you've just doubled revenue and started a poultry-based black market. Of course, every document requires a signature, which in your case means a royal seal. Your scribe heats the wax, presses your custom stamp, and adds a flourish to the bottom. It's all very official, even if you secretly suspect half of what you're approving is just a way for your council to get out of actual work. Once, you signed a decree allowing for a festival of turnips, and it's now an annual event. You still have nightmares about the costumed vegetables. In between the paperwork, there are requests for judgment. Two lords are arguing about which one technically owns the muddy bit of land where everyone dumps their chamber pots. A town wants permission to build a new road, which mostly means asking if they can move the local witch's favorite tree. And then there's your extended family, who seem to believe your true purpose in life is to grant them new titles, lands, and lucrative rights to toll every animal that breathes in their general direction. Sometimes you hand out favors just to keep the peace. Other times, you invent new jobs, royal stalk counter, to occupy particularly persistent relatives. All the while, your scribes stand by, quills in hand, waiting for your verdict. They record everything you say with alarming accuracy. Even your half-muttered jokes. Nothing is forgotten. Years later, historians will pore over these documents and wonder why you banned the sale of blue hats on Thursdays. The answer is always the same. You were tired, hungry, and just wanted the paperwork to end. By the end of the day, your desk is still piled high, your hand aches, and you're convinced that the true power in the kingdom belongs to the people who control the ink supply. You've signed laws about everything from bridge repairs to the proper etiquette for sneezing in front of the royal dogs. So the next time you grumble about a confusing tax form or an overly detailed workplace memo, just remember, medieval monarchs suffered through paperwork too. Only theirs sometimes included a duel at the end. And yes, your cousin still wants to collect tolls from passing ducks. Some things never change. Toileting as royalty is no less humiliating, just slightly more private. The garderobe is a drafty stone seat overhanging a moat. You ponder life, question your choices, and hope nobody is swimming underneath. Let's be honest. Every kingdom has its dirty secrets, but none are quite as literal as the royal bathroom routine. If you ever pictured the monarch of the realm taking care of business on a gilded, velvet-cushioned throne, think again. The garderobe is essentially a glorified hole in the wall. Drafty, echoing, and never quite warm enough. It's an architectural afterthought tacked onto the outer edge of the castle, which, for the sake of sanitation, means out of sight, out of mind, out of nose range, hopefully. Here's the experience. After winding your way down a dark corridor, past bored guards and suspicious tapestries, you reach the royal privy. There it is. A cold stone bench with a convenient opening directly above the castle's moat or the waste pit below. In theory, gravity does the rest. In practice, the process is less a moment of relief and more an exercise in philosophical reflection. You're seated, knees hunched, staring at a wall that's decorated only with dampness and the scratchings of a previous monarch who probably had the same desperate hope. Please let no one be in the moat right now. Privacy is relative. Sure, you have your own garderobe, but sound carries in a stone tower, and you're always aware that someone is probably waiting in line for you to finish. The servants, of course, know your schedule. Some poor footman is standing outside with a perfumed cloth, ready to freshen the air with a handful of dried lavender, or, if it's a feast day, just a prayer for mercy. Sometimes, a page will politely clear his throat to remind you not to linger too long. The council is waiting, and besides, there's a draft working its way up through the seat that could freeze a knight's chainmail. If you're not in the castle, or you're in a hurry, the chamber pot is your other option. This isn't your grandmother's porcelain. Medieval chamber pots are functional, heavy, and absolutely not something you want to trip over in the dark. The etiquette is simple. Use, cover, and hope a servant remembers to empty it before things get out of hand. Every noble has a story about a chamber pot mishap. Some involve spilled secrets, some just involve spills. Toileting as royalty is also an exercise in humility. There are no soft linens or two-ply luxuries here. Toilet paper? A fantasy for future generations. You're left with rough cloths, moss, or, if you're truly unlucky, a handful of hay. It's not about comfort, it's about survival and praying that your royal robes don't get too close to the edge. Medieval fashion did not consider the risks of trailing sleeves. Every so often, you're reminded that the garderobe isn't just for business, it's a security risk. Moats are not just for keeping out invaders. They're occasionally used for sneaking in. History records more than one hapless assassin attempting to enter the castle via the waste chute. Nothing says glamorous court life like worrying that someone might climb up the plumbing with a dagger and a bad attitude. There are rumors, of course, about what goes on below. Some say the moat carp are especially large, thanks to their unusual diet. Others insist that the moat is haunted by the ghosts of failed castle engineers. You try not to dwell on it. You finish as quickly as possible, rise, and straighten your dignity and your crown. So, the next time you're tempted to complain about a weak flush or low water pressure, remember the royal garderobe. If you survived that daily ordeal with your reputation, robes, and sense of smell intact, you were doing better than most. Medieval royalty may have had power over land, law, and life itself. But when nature called, everyone, king or peasant, was just a human perched nervously over a hole, praying that the wind wouldn't blow at the wrong moment. When you're not plotting or being plotted against, you're required to have fun. That means nights of listening to questionable poetry, watching minstrels juggle flaming chickens, and laughing at jokes you don't understand. Entertainment, in the medieval royal court, isn't about personal choice. It's a public service. Your happiness is a matter of state, which means it's also everyone else's business. Courtiers arrange an endless parade of amusements, each trying desperately to outdo the last. If you secretly crave a quiet evening by the fire, too bad. You're at the center of the social hurricane, expected to applaud, feign delight, and occasionally pretend that your cousin's interpretive dance isn't giving you anxiety. Let's start with the minstrels. They are everywhere, singing songs about the heroic deeds of your ancestors, most of which are completely made up, composing ballads for guests who tip well, and sometimes improvising verses about your eating habits. They come equipped with lutes, lyres, and the uncanny ability to find the one note that makes the castle dogs howl. You try to look engaged, even when the fifth song of the night rhymes glory with poultry. Minstrels know which side their bread is buttered on. The more they flatter the crown, the more likely they are to leave with all their teeth. Then there are the jesters. Their job is to amuse, distract, and occasionally insult everyone present, especially you. The court jester is a professional survivor, able to read a room and figure out which jokes will get him a new pair of shoes and which will get him chased by guards. He juggles apples, eels, sometimes flaming torches. Health and safety regulations are centuries away, and has a well-rehearsed act for every occasion. His humor is as unpredictable as medieval plumbing, sometimes sharp, sometimes bawdy, and always risky. If you're lucky, he targets your rivals. If you're not, you're in for a 10-minute monologue about royal hygiene that's somehow funnier for everyone else. The performances don't stop there. Enter the acrobats, flexible, daring, and usually brought in from some distant land for the express purpose of falling off things in a dignified way. Their routines involve tumbling, balancing on precariously stacked objects, and making you feel slightly nervous about the expensive tapestries behind them. Court magicians might attempt a trick, producing a dove from under the steward's hat, or more often, producing nothing and blaming it on mysterious forces. On really special occasions, there might be a trained bear or a dancing goat, at which point even the most battle-hardened knights start to look for an exit. Of course, there's always that one guy with the lute. Every court has him. He's not technically a professional, but no one has had the heart to tell him. He insists on performing his original compositions, which are usually about lost love, the sadness of winter, or how much he enjoys soup. His songs go on for days. You clap politely, knowing full well that any negative feedback will result in 3 new verses and a reprise. All this entertainment is carefully watched and commented upon by the courtiers, who treat every performance as a test of taste and loyalty. Clap too enthusiastically for the wrong act, and you'll start a rumor. Fail to laugh at the jester's punchline, and you're troubled by affairs of state. If you yawn, you're unwell. If you sneak out early, you're plotting. By midnight, the only thing you really want is for everyone to go home, so you can scrape the pie crust out of your hair and forget the sound of the lute. But in the medieval court, the show must always go on. Applause is as much a survival strategy as armor, and your ability to endure endless entertainment is just one more way you prove your fitness to rule. So next time you find yourself trapped at a dull party, spare a thought for your royal ancestors, who faced every evening with the courage to smile at flaming poultry and the patience to applaud for just one more song. As royalty, you are basically God's middle manager. Daily prayers, public fasts, and endless sermons are your routine. Plus, the occasional relic to kiss, just in case. Medieval royalty and religion go together like peas and boiled carrots, inseparable, mostly bland, and forced down your throat whether you want them or not. Your day doesn't begin with a luxurious lie-in. It starts with the chapel bell clanging through the castle, demanding your presence for morning prayers. You shuffle in, still half asleep, dressed in enough brocade and velvet to buy a small village. The priest drones through the service in Latin, a language you may or may not actually understand, while you try not to let your mind wander to breakfast, or whether you remembered to sign yesterday's decree about goose theft. There's no such thing as skipping. If you're absent, rumors swirl. Is the king losing faith? Is the queen consorting with heretics? Are you, perhaps, possessed by demons, or, worse, a little bit French? The chaplain is always watching, eager to remind you that a missed prayer now is eternal damnation later. Even your confessions aren't private. Your spiritual advisor is probably a distant cousin who's taking notes for the council. Fasting is another fun part of royal spirituality. Forget lavish banquets or midnight snacks. Half the calendar is blocked out for fast days, saints' days, holy days, and days invented just to keep the butchers humble. On fasting days, your meals shrink to pious little portions. A slice of stale bread, a watery bowl of pottage, and maybe, if you're feeling truly holy, a handful of beans. Meanwhile, the cooks wage war in the kitchen, trying to make no-meat pie seem appetizing, and everyone swaps tips on how to hide a slice of bacon under a pile of boiled cabbage. Of course, public piety is half the job. Royalty is expected to lead processions, sponsor church repairs, and, on feast days, hand out alms with a face that says, "I love charity and not I hope this doesn't get mud on my shoes." You have to act suitably moved during relic displays, a parade of ancient bones, splinters of saintly fingernails, and, occasionally, suspiciously fresh miraculous blood. You kiss the relic, cross yourself, and try not to think about germs or the fact that half the court is watching to see if you do it correctly. Sundays are reserved for even longer sermons, packed churches, and impromptu public confessions. The clergy love to remind you that even kings and queens are dust before the Almighty. But also, conveniently, that God favors generous donations to the church roof fund. The congregation waits for your every gesture, kneeling, crossing yourself, even the speed of your amen, ready to interpret the smallest sigh as a sign of political trouble. The bishop gives you a pointed look, as if you personally invented the concept of sin. And then there are the guilt trips. Medieval religion is built on a complex foundation of hope, fear, and a generous helping of shame. Didn't fast hard enough? Sin. Thought uncharitable thoughts about your cousin? Sin. Fell asleep during Mass? Double sin. Your spiritual advisors are masters of passive-aggressive reminders. Some kings stay awake for the whole service, and every sermon is a chance to remind you of your failings, in life and, if you're not careful, in death. In the rare moments you're not in church, you're reading letters from the Pope, sponsoring monastic debates about whether hedgehogs have souls, and fielding requests to name your next child after the patron saint of contagious diseases. Your calendar is a jigsaw puzzle of obligations, prayer vigils, confessionals, processions, blessings, and at least one festival dedicated to the most holy turnip. There's no escape. Even your personal chambers are decorated with icons, relics, and enough incense to make you permanently nostalgic for fresh air. So the next time you're tempted to skip your morning meditation, just remember, medieval royalty was on a permanent guilt trip, surrounded by incense, Latin, and enough reminders of their own sinfulness to fill a dozen confessionals. And they didn't even get coffee. If you survived the day with your soul and your dignity mostly intact, you'd already done better than most. The sniffles are dangerous. The court physician prescribes leeches, herbal concoctions, and possibly a prayer marathon. You start to wonder if your headaches are from stress or just from wearing your crown too long. Getting sick as royalty is not the relaxing spa day you might hope for. There's no lying in bed binge-watching shows with chicken soup. Instead, the moment you sneeze, a small army of attendants descends. The physician, the apothecary, 3 anxious cousins, and at least 1 monk with opinions about your immortal soul. All of them are convinced your future, and the stability of the entire realm hangs on whether your fever breaks by sunset. Let's start with the royal physician. He's part scientist, part magician, and all guesswork. The official treatment for most ailments is balance the humors, which means adjusting the delicate ratio of blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile in your royal system. Too cold? You need hot herbs. Too hot? Time for a cold compress. Feeling blue? Definitely an excess of black bile. No problem. We'll just let some blood out and see if you cheer up. Leeches are the go-to solution for almost everything. Sore throat? Leeches? Swollen ankle? More leeches. Existential dread? Double leeches, just in case. The palace actually maintains a royal collection of the squirmy little helpers, each carefully labeled and coddled like family pets. You become strangely familiar with their names and temperaments. Oh, don't use Geraldine. She's too aggressive on the wrists. It's both horrifying and, in a weird way, the closest thing to a medieval support animal. If leeches don't work, and they never do, it's time for potions. The apothecary brings a dazzling array of bottles and jars, filled with concoctions made from every plant, root, and occasionally animal part known to the kingdom. Some remedies are based on ancient texts. Others are based on what the apothecary's grandmother did during the Black Death. Your options include boiled nettles for a cough, ground-up pearls for a fever, and, for those times when your humors are just too stubborn, a brisk walk in the fresh air, preferably while being doused in holy water. And don't forget the power of prayer. A royal illness is a public event. The court chaplain organizes vigils, the cathedral fills with the scent of incense, and peasants are encouraged to pray for your speedy recovery, or at least a smooth succession, depending on how you're looking that morning. Sometimes the prayers work, sometimes they just make you sneeze harder. Meanwhile, the diagnosis is an adventure in itself. Physicians might consult the stars, the color of your urine, which is now a hot topic of discussion at dinner, or your dreams. One cough, and suddenly everyone's debating whether you have the plague or just an allergy to your cousin's new perfume. The treatments are, at best, a gamble. Surgery? Only if you're feeling brave. Anesthesia is mostly just a strong drink, and someone holding your arms down. If you survive, you're considered both blessed and, frankly, a bit of a medical miracle. Royalty or not, catching something as simple as a cold is a reminder that you're mortal. And, as the days drag on, you start to miss the times when the only thing throbbing was your headache from last night's feast. By the time you recover, usually despite the treatments, not because of them, you have a new appreciation for the resilience of your ancestors, and for the miracle that is modern hand sanitizer. So, next time you reach for the cough syrup or grumble about a long wait at urgent care, remember, in the Middle Ages, medicine was mostly creative guessing, a leech or two, and a lot of wishful thinking. If you got better, it was a sign of divine favor, or maybe just luck. Either way, you were grateful. And you probably gave the leeches a bonus. Scandal breaks out at least once a week. Someone's sleeping with the wrong person, or a goat has been found in the kitchen. Crisis management means issuing proclamations and pretending nothing happened. Welcome to Royal Public Relations, Medieval Edition. In a world without social media, scandal still travels at the speed of gossip, bouncing from the kitchens to the council chamber and back again before you can even finish your breakfast. If you ever thought being a monarch meant having control over your own reputation, think again. The truth is, you're always one awkward dinner, suspicious letter, or runaway goat away from total chaos. Let's start with the basics. Every castle is a hive of rumor. The servants know everything. They're the original news network, and they love a juicy story almost as much as they love a pay raise. If a lady-in-waiting is seen sneaking down the corridor after midnight, the whole staff will know by sunrise. If your uncle is caught napping in the stables, That information is instantly transformed into a wild tale involving forbidden love, secret deals, and at least 3 barn cats. Nothing stays secret for long. In fact, the less truth there is to a rumor, the faster it spreads. Medieval logic. When a scandal erupts, the royal response is all about damage control. First, you gather your council, the medieval equivalent of an emergency PR team. Everyone talks at once, suggesting increasingly unhelpful solutions. The Chancellor wants to issue an official denial. Your mother-in-law recommends a pilgrimage. Your most loyal knight suggests challenging the gossiper to a duel. You weigh your options while quietly hoping the goat in question has the sense to disappear before the next feast. Of course, proclamations are the backbone of royal reputation management. The scribe drafts a declaration on fancy parchment, adorned with as many gold flourishes as possible, because if you can't convince them with the message, at least distract them with the calligraphy. The announcement goes out. His Royal Highness denies any knowledge of the alleged midnight goat chase. Anyone claiming otherwise will be fined, flogged, or, in severe cases, invited to explain themselves to the Archbishop over a very long dinner. Usually, no one believes a word, but at least it shows you're trying. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, you're quietly reassigning servants, moving relatives into new positions, preferably far away, and making sure that the kitchen staff all receive a bonus for their sudden loyalty. If the scandal involves romance, and it almost always does, you orchestrate a swift wedding, a discreet retirement, or, for really big messes, a spiritual retreat for the offending party. Everyone knows what it means. But everyone agrees to pretend otherwise. Damage control also includes keeping the nobles happy. Nobles, after all, love a scandal unless it's about them. You throw a feast, offer toasts, and tell everyone how much you value discretion, while quietly reminding the worst gossips that the last person who spread rumors ended up exiled, or worse, married to a tax collector. The court poet writes a new song celebrating virtue, loyalty, and the absolute impossibility that anyone important could ever be involved in anything improper. And don't forget the church. Medieval scandals are not just a political risk, but a spiritual one. The bishop offers extra prayers for the soul of the kingdom, and, coincidentally, for his own continued access to the royal wine cellar. Relics are paraded through the halls for a quick blessing, just in case. You make a public donation to a local monastery, knowing it will be repaid with a timely sermon about forgiveness and moving on. Through it all, you practice the royal art of pretending nothing has happened. Smile serenely at every question, speak only in vague platitudes, and redirect all awkward conversations toward the weather, the upcoming festival, or the ever-popular debate about which saint is responsible for goats. If you're lucky, the scandal fades by next week, replaced by something new, and even more ridiculous. And if not, well, at least you have a very nice parchment proclamation to show for your troubles. So next time you see a tabloid headline or a trending tweet, remember, medieval royals handled scandal with the same tools, spin, denial, and just enough drama to keep things interesting. Some things never change. Every shadow is suspicious. You develop the ability to sleep with one eye open and start interviewing new tasters every Tuesday. Trust issues? Consider it job security. Being royalty in the Middle Ages isn't just about gold, banquets, or posing for slightly unflattering tapestries. It's also about surviving. Your kingdom is one big game of who wants to be a murder victim, with new contestants arriving daily. Every noble, cousin, or courtier might see your throne as the ultimate promotion opportunity. And they're not afraid to get creative. It starts with the food. Poison is the classic choice. A little too much nightshade in your stew, a suspiciously bitter wine, or a pie that's been handled by someone with a vendetta and a working knowledge of local mushrooms. Your food taster is the unsung hero of the court, bravely sampling every dish, and you watch their face for even the faintest hint of regret. Survive breakfast, and you're off to a good start. Survive dinner, You deserve a medal, or, at the very least, a new set of trusted servants. But it's not just the cuisine. Paranoia is a full-time job. You develop a sixth sense for side-eye at banquets, for the way a chamberlain lingers just a moment too long by the tapestries, or for the slightly off smell of your midday wine. Locks are checked and rechecked. The guards rotate on irregular schedules, never letting anyone get too cozy at the palace gates. You hold important meetings in rooms where the walls are thick and the windows small, preferably with a quick escape route under the rug, just in case. Every visitor is a potential suspect. Letters arrive sealed in wax, but anyone with a spoon and enough ambition can doctor a message. New servants are quietly vetted. Where did you live before? Why do you have that scar? Are you allergic to almonds or just highly suspicious of marzipan? No one is above scrutiny, not the nobles who praise you too much, not the bishop who prays a little too loudly for your continued health, and certainly not that distant cousin who keeps sending gifts of sharp objects for your collection. Sleeping is an adventure all its own. You don't just hop into bed and call it a night. There's a ritual. Secret knocks, hidden locks, a ceremonial checking of the mattress for any inconvenient daggers or snakes. If you're truly anxious, you sleep with your dagger under your pillow and your favorite hound curled up by the door. You train yourself to wake at the sound of the lightest footstep, the creak of a floorboard, or the distinct sound of a servant accidentally tripping over their own sense of self-preservation. And then, of course, there's the architecture. Castles are designed for defense, but also for escape. Secret passages abound, just in case you need to vanish before dessert. Sometimes, you'll duck out of the great hall mid-feast for a private moment, only to emerge in the chapel, or, in extreme cases, in the stables next to a very startled horse. Every castle has its share of legends, kings who disappeared, queens who faked illness to avoid a poisoned cup, courtiers who simply vanished one rainy afternoon, never to be seen again. If you make it through the day without being stabbed, poisoned, or locked in a tower, congratulations. The court poets will sing about your wisdom. The nobles will toast your unshakable trust. And your enemies will grumble and try again next week. The lesson is simple. In the world of medieval royalty, trust is a luxury you literally can't afford. Every friend is a potential foe, every meal a gamble, and every late night knock a possible last call. But hey, nothing sharpens the senses, or the sense of humor, like a little light treason with your morning tea. So next time you worry about office politics, remember, at least your co-workers aren't actually plotting your demise over lunch, probably. Your children are your legacy, your bargaining chips, and your biggest headache. You barely see them, but their tutors send daily reports on who's falling behind in Latin or fencing. Being a royal parent is nothing like modern parenting. There are no soccer games, no bedtime stories, and certainly no heart-to-heart talks about feelings. Instead, you have a rotating cast of nannies, governesses, tutors, and spiritual advisors, all tasked with turning your offspring into future rulers, diplomats, and, with luck, less awkward versions of your least favorite cousin. The day begins early for royal children. The nursemaid arrives at dawn with a basin of cold water and a stern warning about the dangers of idleness. Then it's off to the classroom, a drafty chamber lined with maps of kingdoms you might inherit if the right uncle chokes on the wrong pheasant bone. The curriculum? A heavy blend of Latin grammar, French pronunciation, scripture recitation, calligraphy, and a side of advanced etiquette. The goal is to make sure your children can recite Virgil while maintaining eye contact with a bishop and not spilling wine on their doublet. There are fencing lessons, naturally, because no royal child is complete without the ability to poke their siblings with a blunt sword under the guise of training. Archery for the boys, embroidery for the girls, although sometimes the opposite, especially if the archery instructor owes your wife a favor. Physical activity is closely monitored, and bruises are considered evidence of character building, unless they're visible during portraits. Heaven forbid a future monarch be painted with a black eye from last week's spirited debate in the tilt yard. Meals are communal and instructional. Children are seated according to rank, reminded not to slouch, and watched by a phalanx of tutors ready to correct the slightest deviation from proper table manners. Do not talk with your mouth full. Do not feed the dog under the table. Do not challenge the ambassador's son to single combat over dessert. It's a lot to remember, and the dog still gets fed. The royal nursery isn't exactly a haven of warmth and cuddles. Affection is expressed through titles and expectations. Each child is called my lord or my lady by staff and siblings alike. You, as the parent, see them at special occasions, birthdays, feast days, or the annual portrait session where you all stand awkwardly together, pretending that family harmony isn't just a political performance. And speaking of politics, your children are walking treaties, betrothal fodder, and insurance policies. Every new birth is celebrated not just with cake, but with careful negotiations over which noble house gets to claim godparent status. By the age of 8, your eldest is already learning how to spot a poisoning attempt and how to smile politely at someone who might one day try to seize their lands. Childhood innocence, medieval style, lasts about as long as it takes to learn your first Latin declension. Still, there are moments of rebellion. Secret games in the garden, midnight snacks smuggled from the kitchens, and the occasional prank played on a humorless tutor. These fleeting joys are traded for the heavy weight of expectation. Remember, my child, you are the hope of the dynasty. Also, don't spill gravy on your betrothal contract. By adolescence, your children know they are being watched by you, by the court, and by every other family with a claim to the throne. Success means survival. Failure means exile, a convent, or, worst of all, being sent to live with that branch of the family who collects decorative toads. In the end, royal parenting is less about nurturing and more about shaping, molding your heirs to withstand the endless pressure, scrutiny, and intrigue that is royal life. If they turn out clever, brave, and a little bit sneaky, you've done your job. So next time your child forgets their homework, take comfort. At least their mistakes won't start a war with Burgundy. Probably. You'd think being royalty means endless gold, but most of it is owed to angry Italian bankers or being used to patch holes in the roof. Your financial advisor is just a man with a very large abacus and even larger sense of panic. The popular image of medieval royalty is all glittering crowns, overflowing treasure chests, and enough gold to bathe in, if you're into that kind of thing. In reality, the royal coffers are more cautiously optimistic than overflowing. The moment you inherit the throne, you also inherit a ledger full of debts, IOUs, and a suspiciously long list of creditors who would like to speak with you in private. Let's start with income. Royal revenue streams are a patchwork of taxes, tolls, and feudal dues, all theoretically pouring in from your loyal subjects. In practice, half the money disappears into the pockets of local lords, some is paid in chickens, who never seem to lay eggs, and the rest arrives after the harvest, assuming there was no flood, famine, or accidental fire in the tax office. There's always a new tax to consider. Window taxes, bridge tolls, wool levies, or the infamous salt tax, which mostly results in angry letters and creative smuggling operations. Meanwhile, the outgoings never stop. Every feast, every festival, every jousting tournament is a bottomless pit of expenses. Food, wine, musicians, minstrels, replacement minstrels after the food fight, repairs to the tilt yard, and endless new outfits for you and your court. If you're not careful, you'll find yourself haggling over the price of goose feathers for your ceremonial cape, while your treasurer quietly hyperventilates in the corner. And then there are the debts. Medieval kingdoms run on credit, and the best creditors are the Italian banking families. Always polite, always punctual, and always eager to remind you that late fees are a thing. If you're especially unlucky, you'll discover your father mortgaged half the kingdom's vineyards to pay for a crusade that didn't even make it out of port. Every year, your advisors shuffle funds, sell off minor titles, and pawn royal jewelry to keep the palace roof patched and the kitchen stocked with something more impressive than turnips. Speaking of the palace roof, why is it always leaking? Castles are impressive to look at, but not so great at keeping out the weather. Every season brings new disasters. Rain pouring into the council chamber, wind howling through the great hall, and icicles forming in places no one wants to talk about. You'd think that centuries of castle-building experience would solve the problem, but apparently, watertight is just another word for temporarily less wet. Your maintenance crew, such as it is, consists of an aging mason, 2 terrified boys, and a dog who occasionally chases away rats but mostly just naps in the treasury. Meanwhile, the royal household is constantly inventing new ways to spend money. The queen needs new tapestries. The prince has accidentally destroyed another carriage. And the bishop's pet project to gild the chapel ceiling is already over budget. Every day brings a new request for funds, repairs, rewards, bribes, dowries, or just a little something extra for the jester's retirement plan. And then, of course, there's the dreaded audit. The royal financial advisor arrives, abacus in hand, eyes wide with existential terror. He tries to explain the numbers, but by the 3rd column, even you start to feel faint. The solution is usually to declare a new holiday, tax everyone twice, and hope nobody notices that the royal crown jewels are quietly missing a few rubies. In the end, being a royal treasurer is an endless game of creative accounting, wishful thinking, and the faint hope that next year's harvest will solve everything. You, as monarch, just smile, sign off on the latest expense, and pray that your creditors never show up all at once. So next time your bank account is running low, remember, even kings and queens had to dodge bill collectors, and their castles still leaked. Some things, it turns out, are truly timeless. Security is tight, but not exactly high-tech. You rely on sleepy guards, hungry dogs, and a moat full of things you'd rather not identify. The castle is your fortress, except when it leaks, collapses, or is on fire. Welcome to the daily reality of medieval security, where state-of-the-art means someone remembered to lock the main gate before sundown and early warning system is just the dog barking at shadows. As a royal, you expect your home to be impenetrable. But in truth, your castle is about as secure as a cardboard box in a rainstorm, just with more turrets and the ever-present smell of damp straw. Let's start with the guards. These are brave souls, hand-picked for their loyalty, muscles, and, ideally, ability to stay awake past midnight. They pace the battlements in chainmail that hasn't been oiled since last Christmas, wielding swords so heavy they're just as likely to drop them on their own toes. The most dangerous weapon in their arsenal is probably a pike, followed closely by the withering glare they use on unruly children and over-enthusiastic minstrels. There's always that one guard who nods off during the quietest shifts. He's been caught snoring in the guard tower, the chapel, and once, memorably, standing up. You keep him around for comic relief. After all, every court needs a scapegoat. Then there are the hounds, supposedly fierce, but more often found curled up by the kitchen fire with a bone and a look of existential contentment. If an intruder ever makes it past the gate, they'll be greeted by a chorus of half-hearted barks and the possibility of being gently licked to death. Some nights, you wonder if the real security risk is a burglar with treats. The moat is your next line of defense. On paper, it's a brilliant deterrent, a wide, murky channel separating the castle from the outside world. In practice, it's a thriving ecosystem of frogs, questionable fish, and unidentifiable floating objects. During droughts, the moat dries up just enough for determined peasants and the occasional very confused cow to wade across. In rainy seasons, the moat floods, sometimes right into the cellar, adding a lovely touch of ambience to your wine storage. No one talks about what actually lives in the moat. But the rumors keep the kids from swimming and the nobles from getting too close to the edge during feasts. Inside, the castle is a maze of passages, stairways, and rooms with strategically placed murder holes. These are less Home Alone and more wishful thinking. The idea is to pour boiling oil or rocks on anyone attempting to breach the walls, but mostly you just hope no one drops a chamber pot at the wrong moment. The castle walls are thick, but not always in the places that matter. The doors creak, the portcullis jams, and the one drawbridge is known to snap shut at the slightest hint of a strong breeze, trapping important guests and the occasional wandering goose. Of course, every fortress has its weak spots, forgotten postern gates, tunnels left over from last century's siege, and windows that were too small to worry about until someone's kid shimmied through. You assign your most vigilant, or at least sleepy, guards to these areas, armed with lanterns, cudgels, and a strong suspicion of anything that moves. But even the best security system is only as good as its users. If the guard captain is distracted by the baker's daughter, or the dogs have decided to unionize for more bones, you're left relying on luck, superstition, and the occasional miracle. Every night, you fall asleep to the clatter of boots, the whimper of wind through arrow slits, and the not-so-distant croak of a frog with questionable intentions. Still, most nights pass without disaster. The castle stands, the guards yawn, the dogs dream, and you sleep knowing that while your defenses may not be perfect, at least everyone's too tired to cause real trouble. So the next time your alarm system glitches or your neighbor's dog barks at 2 a.m., just remember, at least you don't have to worry about a moat monster or a sleepwalking guard. Medieval security, imperfect, endearing, and rarely boring. Entertaining ambassadors is a delicate affair. One wrong comment about moustaches, and you could be at war with Burgundy by breakfast. There's a lot of bowing, gift exchanging, and pretending you know what's in the pie. When foreign dignitaries arrive at your castle, it's not just another dinner party. It's a high-wire act of manners, politics, and strategic flattery. The stakes are higher than the tallest castle tower, because the last thing you want is for your offhand joke about Saxon fashion to become the reason for next spring's siege. The entire court snaps into action. The cooks panic. The stewards rehearse titles, and you rehearse the art of not making a face when handed a ceremonial cheese the size of a toddler. First impressions matter. The visiting delegation is met at the gate by your most trusted nobles, the ones least likely to say something embarrassing, and a small parade of musicians, dogs, and children whose job is to look adorable and non-threatening. As monarch, you greet your guests with a deep bow or curtsy, deep enough to show respect, but not so deep that it looks like you're apologizing for last year's unfortunate incident with the Flemish envoy and the beehive. There's an elaborate exchange of gifts. This is less about generosity and more about making sure nobody goes home with a cursed relic or a horse that bites. Your advisors have spent weeks agonizing over the perfect present, too expensive and you look desperate, too cheap and you're insulting the crown of Hungary. You end up giving them an ornately carved box of spices, imported, naturally, while receiving a tapestry featuring your face, rendered in a style that makes you look like a startled potato. Meals with diplomatic guests are a performance. The seating plan alone is a military operation. Ambassadors from rival kingdoms must be separated by at least 2 bishops and a decorative shrub. You listen to a parade of toasts, all expressing eternal friendship and unbreakable bonds, while the interpreters sweat bullets, hoping no one accidentally proposes marriage to the royal goose. Conversation is a minefield. Small talk topics are carefully vetted. Weather, safe. Hunting, safe, unless someone brings up the Great Boar debacle. Poetry, safe, but only if you can nod convincingly. And religion, dangerous, unless everyone's on the same page about the latest saint's miracle. The less you say, the better. When in doubt, compliment the local architecture, admire the ambassador's jewelry, and feign deep interest in the origins of their ceremonial hat. Entertainment is provided, but delicately. A troupe of minstrels might perform a song in the visitor's native tongue, unless your bard gets the dialect wrong and accidentally insults their grandmother. A falconry display is usually safe, provided no one's afraid of birds. If things get tense, the court jester is deployed as a distraction. His job is to be just funny enough to ease tension, but not so funny that anyone feels mocked. It's a delicate balance, and no one forgets the infamous incident when the jester's impression of the Venetian envoy nearly caused an embargo. Even the food is a diplomatic challenge. You want to showcase your kingdom's best dishes, but avoid anything that could be mistaken for an insult, allergy, or subtle threat. The kitchen produces endless courses, each more elaborate than the last. You smile, eat what's in front of you, and pray that whatever is in the pie is at least mostly edible. At all times, you pretend to enjoy every bite, and under no circumstances do you ask, "What is this?" especially if the answer might be badger. When it's time for the guests to leave, there are more bows, more gifts, and more speeches about the enduring peace between our realms. You breathe a sigh of relief. No one's thrown a goblet, no duels have been declared, and the only casualty was the ambassador's hat, tragically flattened by a falling tapestry. Diplomacy, medieval style, is less about treaties and more about avoiding disaster. If you manage to keep everyone smiling, nodding, and only mildly offended, you've won the day. So next time you host awkward relatives or complicated colleagues, take heart. At least you don't have to worry about accidentally starting a war over the dessert. Going anywhere means packing half the palace and bracing yourself for bone-shaking roads, runaway oxen, and at least 3 flat tires, if tires had been invented. Travel as medieval royalty isn't glamorous. It's a high-risk sport, a logistical nightmare, and the best way to ruin a good pair of boots. Let's start with the packing. Even a short journey means mobilizing a caravan that looks less like a royal procession and more like a small-scale migration. You bring everything: spare clothes, ceremonial swords, tapestries to cover unfamiliar stone benches, kitchen staff, food tasters, beds, and at least one priest for blessings and, let's be honest, last rites. The royal carriage is the centerpiece of your convoy. In theory, it's a rolling symbol of majesty and authority. In practice, it's a wooden box with windows, wheels that wobble, and no springs whatsoever. The journey is a test of spine and spirit. Every pothole, rock, and rut in the road finds a new way to rearrange your vertebrae. By the end of day 1, your bones are auditioning for new positions, and you're praying for a smooth patch of road, just one. For old time's sake. Outside, the roads are more suggestion than infrastructure. In summer, they're rivers of dust. In winter, they're ankle-deep in mud that swallows wheels and sometimes small children. Bridges are optional, some are sturdy, most are logs thrown across at a daring angle, and a few are just optimistic ideas on local maps. Getting stuck is less a possibility and more of a certainty, which is why every journey includes half the palace guard, 2 blacksmiths, and at least one guy whose job it is to shout, "Push," whenever the carriage sinks up to its axles. And let's talk about animal power. Horses are majestic, but they tire easily, and one good scare from a goose sends them careening into the nearest ditch. Oxen are stronger, but famously stubborn. Once, your convoy was held up for an entire afternoon because the lead ox decided it was resting time and no power in Christendom could persuade him otherwise. Every trip involves at least one animal-related detour, usually ending with someone heroically trying to coax a sheep out of a puddle. Accommodations on the road are, in a word, rustic. If you're lucky, there's a local manor willing to host the royal entourage, meaning an uncomfortable night in a bed that smells like old onions. If not, you're camping, with a pavilion, tapestries, and all the finery of a traveling circus, but camping nonetheless. The kitchen staff sets up makeshift fires, stews whatever can be caught or traded, and you try not to think about the last time the tent was washed. Privacy is a distant dream, as everyone from the stable boy to the court astrologer sleeps within snoring distance. Then there's the ever-present danger of getting lost. Medieval maps are works of speculative fiction, full of cheerful dragons, here be bandits, warnings, and roads that simply disappear into forest or marsh. Your navigator claims to know the way, but after 3 hours circling the same goat pasture, faith begins to waver. If you ask for directions in a village, be prepared for conflicting advice, suspicious stares, and one old woman who insists you're standing on the ruins of Atlantis. Traveling as royalty is never quiet or uneventful. Every stop is a local festival. Every mishap, a new ballad for the minstrels. You're greeted by cheering peasants, grumpy landlords, and the occasional ambitious thief. By the time you reach your destination, you're battered, exhausted, and more grateful than ever for solid ground, even if it means another round of feasts and formalities. So next time your flight is delayed or your GPS can't find the nearest coffee shop, remember, medieval travel made every trip an adventure. At least you don't have to push your own carriage out of the mud unless you really want the authentic royal experience. Royals love their pets, especially if they can bite visitors. You parade around with falcons on your arm, dogs at your feet, and the occasional lion cub that definitely shouldn't be here. Medieval pets are not just companions, they're status symbols, diplomatic gifts, and sometimes the only court members you can actually trust. It starts with the classics, hounds and falcons. Every self-respecting monarch is expected to master the art of falconry. There's nothing quite like striding through the garden with a bird of prey perched majestically on your leather-gloved wrist, glaring at the nobles as if daring anyone to challenge your right to rule, or at least your right to let your bird do unspeakable things to the peasant pigeon population. Training a falcon is a royal tradition and a logistical headache. The birds are temperamental, hungry, and prone to taking off at awkward moments, usually when a rival kingdom's ambassador is in the middle of a delicate treaty negotiation. You try to look serene as your prized goshawk makes a break for the open window, leaving a trail of feathers and royal dignity behind. Dogs, meanwhile, are everywhere. Scent hounds, hunting hounds, lapdogs for the ladies, and scrappy mutts who have insinuated themselves into the kitchen staff. The royal kennels are an empire unto themselves, presided over by the master of hounds, whose job is equal parts animal handler and unofficial therapist to the palace. The dogs are loyal, affectionate, and, when necessary, excellent at intimidating overly ambitious courtiers. They're also very skilled at stealing food, tracking mud through the Great Hall, and starting dramatic brawls over leftover bones during state banquets. But why stop at the usual? Medieval royalty has a soft spot for the exotic. Diplomats arrive with crates from far-off lands, each animal more questionable than the last. Monkeys from Africa, peacocks from India, and, for the especially showy, a bear or two on loan from the Tsar who keeps spares for just such occasions. These animals are meant to demonstrate wealth, power, and an admirable lack of concern for local building codes. Unfortunately, they're also hard to manage. The last time the bishop visited, he was chased down a hallway by a lemur with anger issues. The King of France famously tried to house a giraffe in his garden and spent the next month apologizing to the gardeners and, eventually, the giraffe. Cats, of course, deserve special mention. Some royal households embrace them for their mousing abilities. Others eye them with suspicion, convinced that every cat is a witch in disguise. The royal cats seem to know this, weaving confidently between courtiers' feet and occasionally leaping onto the council table mid-debate. No one argues with a cat who has the run of the castle. Caring for this menagerie is an ongoing production. Royal pet keepers are charged with feeding, bathing, and occasionally rescuing unfortunate diplomats from an overly enthusiastic cheetah. The expenses pile up. Custom collars, imported feed, and the occasional bail paid out when your eagle accidentally terrorizes a neighboring village. But the payoff is undeniable. Nothing breaks the ice at a tense negotiation like releasing a pack of puppies into the Great Hall, or inviting your most tiresome guests to try their luck at falcon handling and seeing who survives with both eyes. At the end of the day, royal pets are more than accessories. They're the living, breathing proof that you have the power to tame, or at least attempt to contain, the wildest elements of the world. They're also a reliable excuse for retreating from awkward conversations. "Excuse me, I must go feed my lynx." So next time you wonder if your pet is too much to handle, remember, at least you're not expected to keep a bear in the basement or explain why there's an ostrich in the chapel. Medieval royalty, never boring, often bitten, and always one step away from total animal anarchy. When your time comes, you're sent off with incense, weeping monks, and a 47-step funeral process. Hopefully, your heirs remember your name, or at least spell it right on the tomb. Dying as medieval royalty is not a subtle affair. There's no quietly slipping away in the middle of the night, no matter how much you might prefer it. The moment your royal pulse stops, the castle erupts into organized chaos. Courtiers rush to confirm the news. Priests descend with candles and holy water, and your closest relatives immediately begin the delicate dance of pretending to mourn while also eyeing the crown. No one wants to be caught smiling at the wrong time, but no one wants to miss their chance at inheritance either. First comes the official announcement. Messengers dash off to distant corners of the kingdom, proclaiming the royal demise. Black banners are unfurled, and everyone is required to don their best devastated subject expression. Meanwhile, the palace physicians do their part by insisting that you died with all your humors perfectly balanced, a point of pride, and a convenient way to pass the blame to your enemies or that suspicious new chef. Your body is prepared for the afterlife with all the dignity medieval science can muster. Embalming is still a work in progress, so the best solution is a hasty washing, a heavy dose of incense, and an equally heavy layer of aromatic herbs. If the weather is cold, everyone breathes a little easier. If it's summer, the ceremony moves quickly, with a suspicious emphasis on speed and solemnity. The funeral itself is a production worthy of a monarch. Processions wind through the streets, led by clergy swinging incense and chanting prayers at a volume only slightly less deafening than the mournful tolling of every bell in the city. Nobles, dressed in funereal finery, trail behind, jostling for position because the closer you are to the casket, the better your claim to the next slice of royal pie. Monks, hired professional mourners, and the entire castle staff join in, forming a parade that is equal parts devotion and competition. The ceremony features a 47-step protocol, laying the body in state so everyone can say goodbye, or at least confirm you're really dead. Ritual blessings, a succession of masses, and a formal procession to your final resting place, usually an ornate tomb or family crypt. If you're lucky, your name and deeds are carved into stone, hopefully with the right spelling and only mild exaggeration. If you're less fortunate, you're remembered as the one who died after the soup incident, and your effigy looks more like a surprised toad than a mighty monarch. Food and drink are essential, even in mourning. Banquets are thrown in your honor, because nothing says grieving like a table groaning with meat pies, spiced wine, and enough bread to feed the entire city. Toasts are made, songs are sung, and inevitably, some distant cousin tries to launch a rebellion before dessert. Of course, there's always a little drama at the burial. Occasionally, rival heirs argue over the best spot in the family crypt or quietly adjust the epitaph after hours. Priests wave incense, nobles weep or fake it, and everyone tries to avoid slipping on the flagstones. In the end, you are laid to rest with all the ritual the kingdom can muster, and just enough ambiguity that centuries later, historians will argue about who really ended up in which tomb. For a royal, death is not the end but another public spectacle, One final show to remind the living of your greatness, your lineage. And, if the stone carver was feeling generous, your good looks. Your passing is a reminder to your subjects. Life is fleeting. Crowns are heavy, and everyone eventually ends up as a fun fact for future dinner parties. So next time you see a headline about a royal funeral, remember, beneath the pageantry, every king or queen was just hoping for a little peace, a dry crypt, and a tomb inscription that didn't call them the unready. Years from now, poets will rewrite your life, historians will get your nose wrong, and everyone will forget your policies about ducks. But hey, at least you got a statue, until someone knocks the head off. Being a royal means living with the sneaking suspicion that the stories told about you will be nothing like the life you actually lived. You spend decades surviving political plots, soup incidents, and the daily terror of medieval plumbing, only to be remembered for something you barely recall doing. Historians will turn your entire reign into a single line. Notable for his love of turnips and the accidental invention of the left-handed spoon. Your signature achievements, like reforming tax law, surviving 3 assassination attempts, and banning the colour puce from formal courtwear, are lost to time. The people remember the pie fight, not the peace treaty. It starts almost immediately after you're gone. Poets, whose job security depends on telling dramatic stories about dead people, get to work. Your minor frown at a council meeting becomes a legendary scowl that quelled rebellion. A mild interest in duck pond management is elevated to the grand unification of waterfowl. Portraits painted in your lifetime, where you look slightly alarmed and distinctly chilly, are quickly copied and improved by later artists. Suddenly, you have the nose of an emperor, the jaw of a bricklayer, and eyes that follow peasants around the room in a way that makes everyone uncomfortable. Your friends, now elevated to trusted advisors in the official narrative, ensure their own roles are just a bit bigger than they actually were. That one cousin who spent most of their time napping in the library is posthumously credited as the kingdom's greatest diplomat. Meanwhile, your enemies take to writing their own histories, painting you as a tyrant, a fool, or a notorious goat enthusiast, depending on the political winds and how much wine is left at the scribe's table. Then comes the monument phase. No royal career is complete without a few statues, at least one of which will have a suspiciously generic face. If you're lucky, your likeness will be preserved atop a horse, sword raised, gazing heroically toward the horizon, or more likely the local market. If you're less lucky, your statue ends up in a forgotten garden, home to generations of pigeons, and minus a head, lost to a protest, a storm, or a particularly reckless game of medieval cricket. Your decrees and edicts, carefully inscribed in expensive ink, are misfiled, mistranslated, and misremembered. Your hard-fought policies, like banning hedgehog theft or introducing mandatory nap time for the Royal Council, fade into legend or become the subject of academic debates centuries later. No one remembers the details, only that it was controversial, possibly about turnips, and the Queen was not amused. But perhaps the strangest legacy of all is how future generations fill in the blanks. A royal rumour, once whispered by bored kitchen staff, can become the accepted truth. A sarcastic comment, written in the margin of a bored monk's diary, ends up quoted in history books. Somewhere down the line, a local festival is named after you, possibly because you once sneezed during a particularly important mass. And then, of course, there are the conspiracy theories. Did you really have a secret tunnel to the bakery? Did you invent the duck parade? Only the most creative historians know for sure. Despite all of this, there's a certain comfort in being misunderstood. It means you're remembered at all. Your portrait, nose and all, might hang in a drafty hall. Your statue might lose the occasional limb, but your name carries on, twisted, inflated, and oddly celebrated. People need stories, and you, dear monarch, have given them plenty. So next time you read about a king or queen and wonder, could they really have been that eccentric? The answer is probably yes. And if not, history will make it so. Because when it comes to legacy, the truth is flexible, the statues are fragile, and the duck policies will outlive us all. You've got a little me time on your royal schedule. So what do you do for fun? That's easy. Strap on a leather glove and try not to lose an eye to a homicidal falcon. Play chess with rules that keep changing, or attempt medieval tennis, which mostly involves hitting a ball into a tapestry and apologizing to your ancestors. Welcome to relaxation. 14th century style. Slightly dangerous and deeply confusing. If you're picturing a gentle, refined hobby, think again. Being royalty means even your leisure activities come with a side order of danger, competition, and occasional existential dread. Let's start with falconry, the king of noble pastimes. There's nothing quite like the thrill of sending a hawk or falcon soaring into the sky, all while pretending you have any control over what happens next. The bird, trained to hunt and sometimes to ignore you entirely, is both a symbol of power and a feathered insurance policy against boredom. You parade through the fields, attendants trailing behind, all eyes on you and your bird, until, inevitably, the falcon decides to chase something more interesting, or simply takes the afternoon off. Nothing ruins your royal mystique quite like calling and calling while your loyal companion disappears over the hill, leaving you standing in the mud with a limp piece of rabbit. If feathered chaos isn't your style, there's always chess, a game so old and revered, every court claims a unique set of traditional rules. Here's how it works. You sit down at a beautifully carved table, facing off against your most cunning advisor, and then spend 2 hours moving pieces while everyone quietly argues about whether the bishop can jump over the knight, or if pawns can moonwalk. Cheating is technically frowned upon, but nobody minds if you reinterpret the rules when the king is losing. Some monarchs have entire libraries of chess strategy, while others just like the clacking sound the pieces make. Losing graciously is optional. Flipping the board in frustration is practically tradition. But the real excitement comes from indoor sports, a phrase that should strike fear into any tapestry-loving heart. Medieval tennis, sometimes called real tennis, is not for the faint of heart or the well-dressed. The court is usually a repurposed hall or cloister, with lines painted by guesswork, and the net represented by a strategically placed bench. The ball is made of stitched leather and seems specifically designed to ricochet off hard surfaces and unsuspecting courtiers. The object of the game? Hit the ball, chase the ball, and try not to break anything valuable or anyone important. Points are awarded for style, luck, and not decapitating your tutor with a badly aimed volley. Other popular hobbies include hunting, outdoors if you want to impress, indoors if you value your kneecaps, dancing with steps that change every season and shoes that could double as weapons, and musical pursuits, if you count composing long, mournful ballads about the weather. Some monarchs enjoy collecting rare books or exotic animals, but even these refined pastimes come with hazards. The books are usually written in Latin, the animals usually want to eat the furniture, and the line between hobby and disaster is very thin. Of course, hobbies aren't just about fun, they're about status. You want your court to know you're skilled, cultured, and able to swing a mallet without personal injury. Success in leisure is just as important as success in battle. A king who can't play chess is suspect. A queen who can't keep a falcon is a disappointment. Every victory is a chance to reinforce your legend. Every loss is an opportunity to blame your cousin, the rules, or the fact that the court jester was clearly distracting you on purpose. So next time you settle in for a cozy night of board games or a round of fetch with your dog, remember, royal hobbies weren't for the faint of heart or the easily embarrassed. Medieval fun was a full-contact sport, and the only real rule was try not to set anything on fire. It's your birthday. That means a feast, a procession, and at least 3 gifts that are still alive and may try to bite you. Guests line up to deliver ornate trinkets, embroidered towels, and, if you're unlucky, a miniature dancing bear. The best present? Surviving the party without anyone getting poisoned, or the jester starting a fire. For medieval royalty, a birthday is less a personal milestone and more an excuse for the entire court to eat too much, argue too loudly, and compete to see who can bring the most absurd present. The day starts with the court herald announcing your age, usually rounded down. For morale, bells ring, trumpets blare, and you're led to the great hall in a procession that's part victory lap, part stress test for the royal staircase. The birthday feast is the centerpiece. Tables groan under platters of roast meat, sweetmeats, and enough bread to reconstruct the castle if the need arises. The kitchen is in chaos, cooks yelling, servants rushing, and at least one unfortunate pie leaking something suspicious onto the sideboard. Musicians perform lively tunes, while a court poet recites verses praising your wisdom, beauty, and excellent taste in undergarments. Everyone laughs at the right moment, because it's your birthday and nobody wants to spend the night in the dungeons. But the real entertainment is the gift-giving. Nobles and foreign envoys queue up to present their offerings, each trying to outdo the last. The gifts range from the impressive gilded goblets, rare books, or a brooch so heavy you could use it as a weapon, to the baffling, an entire flock of geese, a chess set carved from turnips, a jar of miracle ointment that smells strongly of disappointment. There's always someone who brings an exotic animal, parrots, monkeys, or the infamous miniature bear, usually delivered with the warning, "Don't feed it after midnight." Each present comes with a speech, a few flattering words, a pointed political reference, and an attempt to make everyone forget last year's disastrous dancing peacock incident. You try to look gracious, while a nervous page juggles a basket of hissing ferrets at your feet. The bishop offers a hand-copied psalter. Your cousin presents a tapestry depicting your greatest victory, which looks suspiciously like him in the background. If you're lucky, the only living gift you have to manage is a dog. If you're unlucky, you now own a goat with a taste for expensive shoes. The festivities continue with performances, acrobats, jesters, and troubadours all competing for your attention. The jester, emboldened by the crowd, attempts to juggle flaming torches, small animals, or both, depending on how much wine has been served. There's always a risk of minor chaos, spilled wine, singed eyebrows, or the visiting princess fainting at the sight of a snake wrangler's finale. Of course, the day wouldn't be complete without at least one court intrigue. Your rivals might use the occasion to whisper rumors, pass secret notes, or swap coded glances over the cake. You keep an eye on the food taster, who has already sampled every dish twice and now looks both exhausted and slightly green. You accept your gifts, make polite conversation, and hope the party ends without anyone challenging anyone else to a duel over the last piece of marzipan. At sunset, the guests stagger home, laden with leftovers, slightly singed, and still arguing about which present was the most outlandish. You retreat to your chambers, exhausted but victorious. You've survived another year, another round of diplomatic gift-giving, and the threat of surprise animal attacks. So next time your birthday feels overwhelming, remember, at least you don't have to deal with a dancing bear, a jealous cousin, and the real possibility that your cake is hiding a live chicken. Medieval birthdays, festive, extravagant, and never, ever boring. Being royal means you have a wardrobe bigger than most people's houses, yet somehow you can never find matching stockings. The keeper of the wardrobe presents you with a list of garments, half of which have gone missing since last winter's tournament. Embroidery is a big deal. It's not just fashion, it's a flex, until you spill gravy on your velvet robe and need a 5-person emergency cleanup. Medieval royalty knows that clothes aren't just about looking good. They're about power, status, and outdressing the opposition. Every outfit is a statement, and your closet is a textile arms race. The sheer scale is overwhelming. Dozens of tunics, cloaks for every season, hats for every type of wind, and so many pairs of hose that the kingdom's sheep have started a support group. Managing this sartorial empire falls to the keeper of the wardrobe, a cross between a meticulous librarian and a circus ringmaster. Each morning, they arrive clutching a parchment inventory. Your Majesty, we have located the blue brocade doublet, missing 3 buttons, the gold-embroidered mantle, still being repaired after the marzipan incident, and approximately 11.5 silk stockings. You ask about your favorite crimson cloak, only to discover it was loaned to your cousin for last month's hunting party and hasn't been seen since the boar got loose. Embroidery in royal circles is more competitive than jousting. Every noble family parades their best needlework at court, hoping their designs will be admired, envied, and, if all goes well, copied by future generations. Your own garments are walking masterpieces. Velvet robes stitched with gold thread, tunics adorned with intricate patterns, sleeves depicting your greatest victories, and one depicting your dog, by special request. A single robe can take months to complete and require the collective eyesight of every nun within 30 miles. Of course, all this finery is highly impractical. The heavier the garment, the more important you look, but the harder it is to actually move, breathe, or use the garderobe unassisted. You're perpetually trailed by an entourage of attendants, each tasked with holding, straightening, or carrying an emergency change of clothes in case of disaster. Fashion emergencies are common. A torn seam before a banquet, mud splashed during a parade, or, most feared of all, a gravy stain on the new cream velvet. When this happens, the wardrobe team descends with cloths, brushes, and a panicked prayer to St. Veronica, patron saint of laundry. The real crisis, however, is lost hose. Despite owning enough stockings to clothe a small village, you can never seem to find a matching pair. The search is endless, under the bed, behind the tapestries, inside the spare crown. Your keeper of the wardrobe starts a daily stocking report detailing which pairs have gone missing, which have been found in the kitchens, and which have mysteriously shrunk to fit only the court jester. Rumors swirl that the missing hose are being hoarded by a rival noble or, more likely, have been adopted by the castle's mice as luxury bedding. Despite the chaos, fashion is non-negotiable. Every audience, feast, and public appearance requires a new ensemble chosen for color symbolism, seasonal appropriateness, and how well it hides soup spills. You have entire trunks devoted to seasonal trends: spring greens, autumn oranges, morning black for that time the bishop sneezed in chapel. Your shoes alone deserve their own parade. Pointed, buckled, embroidered, and universally uncomfortable. By the time you're dressed, reviewed, and presentable, you've burned enough calories to justify 3 courses at breakfast, and possibly a nap. Your wardrobe is the envy of Europe. Your embroidery is the talk of the realm. And your missing hose are a running joke at court. So next time you can't find your favorite sweater or lose a sock in the dryer, remember, medieval royals had a whole team for that, and still ended up with only 1 blue stocking and a gravy-stained robe before the feast. So tonight, as you close your eyes and drift away from the echoing stone halls, the suspiciously lumpy beds, and the endless parade of backstabbing cousins, take a moment to appreciate just how weirdly difficult it was to be royalty in the Middle Ages. You survived assassination plots before breakfast, chose your outfits under threat of public embarrassment, and spent your days navigating a royal court that made Thanksgiving with your in-laws look like a meditation retreat. It was a world where everyone bowed and curtsied. But nobody ever really relaxed, not even in their own privy. Maybe you didn't get to pick your spouse. Maybe your crown gave you a permanent headache. And maybe your biggest legacy was a statue that pigeons admired a little too much. Yet, through the drafts and disasters, You managed to rule an entire kingdom without Wi-Fi, toothpaste, or a single ergonomic chair. That's commitment. And through it all, somehow, medieval royalty found ways to laugh, plot, feast, and keep going, despite the cold, the gossip, and the daily risk of being poisoned by your own chef. Every decree you signed, every chilly dawn you endured, and every questionable feast you survived was a small, royal act of resilience. The world remembers your big battles and bold decisions, but honestly, it's the daily survival that's most impressive. So tonight, as you sink into your clean sheets and enjoy the miracle of hot water, dental floss, and a fridge that won't betray you, spare a thought for your royal ancestors. They paved the way for modern comforts, sometimes by accident, often by sheer stubbornness, and always with more drama than anyone asked for. History may be messy, uncomfortable, and slightly itchy, but it's also a story of stubborn, hopeful people doing their best with what they had. You're part of that legacy. Even if your only battle tonight is fighting the urge to check your phone one last time, rest easy, noble listener. The throne is safe, the candles are out, and for once, you don't have to worry about anyone poisoning your midnight snack. Sleep well, and dream of kingdoms where the only drama is whether your cat will let you sleep in. Good night.